But I felt like I was at this kind of ministry crossroads. I think a lot of people who go into ministry hit this point. I love study. I had this background already. I love getting to study theology. I love getting to teach. I would get a lot of affirmation about teaching. And so, some of my professors were saying like, hey, you might want to go on and do a PhD and teach. And if you want to do that, you need to do that now. You don't want to wait on it. So I was like, okay, so I guess I'm supposed to go do a PhD. And then I was serving in a local church as a pastoral intern at a PCA church there. And this wonderful place, it was first really gospel-centered church that we'd been in to that degree and that depth. And I'd been in this, like, my first ministry stint was in this, like, super legalistic setting. And so it was just like going to that church was like breathing fresh mountain air. And my pastor there was like, really the best early ministry experience you can get is serving as a pastor in some form and serving at a church. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to be a pastor. And then every time, we went through this missions course, or anytime we'd have a missionary visit the seminary, my heart would burn, and in a good way, not bad heartburn. And really just, okay, Lord, what do you want us to do? And so kind of out of nowhere, Taylor and I are kind of wrestling with these things. She found an article online by Michael O. Michael, he was the founder of CBI. He's currently the CEO of the Lausanne movement. And
Michael is one amazing human being.
He is an amazing human being. So some of the things that like popped for me about Michael, one was that he had multiple Ivy League degrees, right? That's kind of a crazy stat about someone. Two was that he was a missionary who had a doctorate, and that was a combo that I didn't really know was a thing at the time. Three was that he was in Japan, and he was talking about unreached peoples, and I was so surprised because I told you I had that mission map.
Yeah.
The mission map was actually describing engagement, like where missionaries had gone. So Japan was colored in such a way that I assumed that Japan must be reached.
Yeah.
And it also had this mindset that it's wealthy, it's modern, so they don't need anyone. And Michael just put Japan on the radar of these massive needs and this background and this history. And then the last really amazing thing about Michael was just his own testimony. Being a Korean American who was called to love his enemies and had this, historical connection through his parents and his grandparents with Japan, and had all kinds of reason to hate Japan, and yet was called to go and serve there. And so I read this, testimony and this message, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And it was fun because Taylor's sending me resources instead of me, funneling them towards her.
It is another argument for God's grace that he would raise up this Korean to found this ministry in Japan.
Yeah, it really
because of the history between those two nations.
That's absolutely true. And so anyways, Taylor found this article. I read this. I'd never heard of Michael before that. Maybe 2 weeks later, I got an email from a friend of mine at seminary, and he said, hey, I would drive professors to the airport as like one of my part-time jobs. He said, hey, there's this guy, his name's Michael O. He's a missionary in Japan, and he's going to be at RTS in a week, and he needs someone to drive him to the airport. And I was like, wow, that's really weird. I just heard about this guy. I just read his testimony. It's really interesting. So I was like, okay, sign me up. Yeah, sure. And so I remember Michael had a group of seminary students with him, and they were kind of touring different seminaries, and he's kind of like a reverse mission trip for them. We've done something similar since I've been at CBI as well. It's really an amazing experience to get to do that. And so I got to hear these different stories and meet some of the Japanese students. And then I get Michael in my car, and I just looked right over him and I said, Michael, I got to be honest. I said, I had ulterior motives for driving you to the airport. I was like, I have a lot of questions for you. And he was so gracious. And he was like, okay, go ahead. And so I started asking him about that crossroads and sharing about kind of our, like, kind of how do we discern this and how do we know what to do? And Michael, if you know him, this like fits his personality so well. He just looked over at me and he said, if you come to Japan and you work with CBI, you can do all three. And I was like, wow, I hadn't thought about that possibility. And that's a little glimpse about me as well in terms of, being, compelled about that idea, that possibility. And so we began a conversation with Michael and with the CBI team, and ended up committing to go after I graduated from seminary for a year. Taylor sent that call before I did. I came back and told her about this, and she's like, let's go. We went to a follow-up conference thing that Michael was doing in the area, and she's like, all right, that sounds great. Let's do it. I think this is what God wants us to do. And I was just nervous, and I was like, okay. And then as we prayed, the Lord really gave us both a heart to go.